Hello, and thanks for joining us this morning at the Startup Grind. Today's event is brought to you by the Spark Centre, a regional innovation center here in Durham region. My name is Peter Garrett. I do government relations for Durham College, and I'm also a proud alumni. And I'm really happy to be here today because one of the great privileges of working at the college is getting to know some of our farming and our culinary programming at the Whitby campus, which I'm sure you'll hear more about today. But it's a real privilege to be joining all of you today and to be taking part in this conversation. Before we begin, we would like to thank Spark Centre's elite partners, Alterna Savings, Finance Without Borders, and Osgood Law School. I'd also like to encourage the audience to use the comment section within the Hop-In platform to ask any questions that might come to mind throughout the conversation. So hopefully you'll hear a few things and some ideas are kind of sparked. So I'll also remind the audience to stay tuned after the panel for networking within the program. If you haven't tried networking on the Hop-In platform before, it's fun, easy, and a great way to meet some new faces. I know I'll be sticking around to do a little bit of networking after the panel as well, as I hope we've all got lots to talk about after this great conversation. Now, as many of you know, Spark Centre puts out a quarterly magazine called Spark, Business and Innovation Magazine. And like the summer issue, today's Startup Grind focuses on the topic of farm to table. Be sure to head to thesparkmagazine.ca to subscribe and keep an eye on your email tomorrow for the launch of this exciting issue following this conversation. I'm thrilled to be here today to come together with the following industry leaders who are featured in the summer issue, which again will be released tomorrow, and who are nurturing and contributing to the development and success of the farm-to-table movement here in Ontario. We'll be joined today by Shane Jones, who is the farm manager of the Barrett Centre of Innovation and Sustainable Urban Agriculture at Durham College, as well as Lizette Lacoursiere, who is the senior project consultant at Food Security Structures Canada, as well as Tina Stevens, who is the general manager of Valley Heartland CFDC. Today, we look forward to exploring entrepreneurial and business journey of these leaders, the exciting new developments in agri-tech and innovative facilities here in the region, trends in the sector, and what the future will bring, why the farm-to-table movement is so critical to our economy, society, and our local communities, and steps that we can all take to ensure and help organizations and individuals to create more sustainable and food-secure future for our whole community. Now, I'd like to welcome the panelists to join me on stage. And as we open today's discussion, I would love to have each panelist take a moment to introduce yourself and your organization. And I'll start off with Shane.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. As Peter said, I'm the farm manager for the Barrett Centre of Innovation in Sustainable Urban Agriculture. Thankfully, it's up there as a title because I can never remember that. But formally, in my time here at Durham College, I've been the coordinator for the food and farming program that we run, as well as a horticulture technician and a professor in both programs. So I'm coming from that background of farm to table education and local sustainable food from that lens. But that even leads back to my former career in the Toronto District School Board, teaching from the secondary standpoint in the exact same thing, working in Scarborough and helping people understand what local sustainable food looks like and how it is that they can add that to their communities.
Awesome, thank you. And Lizette, I'll have you introduce yourself next.
My name is Lizette Lacoursiere. I'm with Food Security Structures Canada. I'm a senior project consultant. I started with Food Security Structures almost 4 years ago as a company was just launching. My background is as an entrepreneur first, then I became an educator, and then an acupuncturist and a natural health practitioner. So my background is heavily weighted towards the nutritional side and how food is important for the health of our communities. So this was a logical extension for me to actually go into Food Security Structures Canada field because it seemed that I could help more people. and seeing the emerging technologies and what that could really do to transform our foodscape was very appealing to me. So we offer a turnkey solution for food security, including the agri-capsules, the indoor vertical aeroponic growing structures, some pretty specific technologies that are new and emerging, such as LED electromagnetic spectrum frequency lighting, CO2 injections, biodigesters. It's the whole package, which really made a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizette. And last but certainly not least, Tina.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. I'm Tina Stevens. I'm the general manager here at Valley Heartland CFDC. We are a nonprofit organization mandated to support entrepreneurship and job creation while assisting rural communities. We develop and implement strategies for dealing with changing economic environment. It's very timely for us. We've seen a great deal of growth in terms of food and the restaurant and food industry. 2% of the businesses in our area are farms. Our catchment area is Lanark County and North Leeds. And of the top 10 growing employment sectors in our county, 3 of them are food related. That's through food tourism, agri-food, and farming. So we've seen a lot of interest over the last few years, I would say, especially from smaller farm to fork type of businesses. So it's good to be here, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, panelists. So with the introductions underway, we'll just jump right into the conversation. And again, I'll encourage the audience as we get through a few questions ourselves to think of, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So you're all here channeling your passion for sustainability, nutrition, agriculture, and urban farming from these different lenses. Can you tell me, why have you chosen this path? And how would you describe your business and entrepreneurial journey to date? And I think I'll have, well, Tina, I'll have you kick us off on this first question.
Sure. It's a little bit different, I suppose, from my perspective, but we see a great deal of entrepreneurs come in and they're starting in this industry or in this sector for various reasons. Some right from a hobby, some because it's a family farm, some because they see the benefit in, promoting local food, healthy eating, and that type of thing. So I got into the business of helping other businesses, providing financing, economic development, and things of that nature. So not necessarily the industry myself, but we do see a vast number of businesses get into the sector for so many different reasons.
Thank you. Shane, Lizette, anything to add from your stories?
For sure. The Barrett Centre of Innovation in Sustainable Urban Agriculture, even without the tagline, I got that time. The whole idea for us, what the Barrett Centre is about, and what we were trying to do is bring sustainable urban agriculture to the forefront, into the public, into the view of communities that are traditionally underserviced or marginalized, but I mean, really just to everyone. So in that way, in building, kind of recreating what we've done here at the Whitby campus, we've got about an acre of market garden type space, as well as an orchard, and a whole bunch of other little models of different ways to sustainably produce within a very small space for our students to learn from. But to kind of recreate that, and kind of the focus as we move forward with the Barrett Centre especially, is to just kind of normalize that within our communities and kind of regain some of what has been lost as far as generational knowledge, and to really kind of key people back into what food production looks like. Because when we compare it to what is traditional urban or traditional agriculture, and when I say traditional, it's really only within our past few generations that we've normalized this large scale industrialized version of agriculture. It's kind of getting people to understand, kind of get back to the beginning, and that's kind of been our focus and our passion, and hopefully able to make a lot more people aware, but also to educate our communities and our students who are on campus, so that they can bring that back to our communities and to further nurture that or propagate it, I guess.
Awesome. And Lizette?
Yeah, so I'll speak on a little bit personally, obviously because of my health background. I just see that, looking at where our food comes from is really important. One of the first things I learned is like 80% of our food in Canada comes from over the border. And that really puts us in a very vulnerable position. Malnutrition is really a driver of illness. And if we know what's coming down the tubes, we need to be prepared to be able to provide more nutritional food for our communities. Considering that climate change is coming, we have to look at how do we modernize what's going on and how do we bring it forward into the next generation, so to speak. And that indoor vertical farming is what we do. And I think that there's been a lot of buzz and conversation about that. We're really not meant to be a mono farm or promote that. We already have enough of that. And that has its own vulnerability. So I think that trying to keep it really simple and really local. And our founders of the company really wanted to address food insecurity in remote Indigenous communities. That was the original impetus for the development of the company. And we're seeing things, like $22 for a bag of potatoes and, $10 for a watermelon or more. And so the real motivation for us being in this industry is to bring it to more local, to make it more specific to what the community's needs are. And to really bring something that was synergistic and not just a bunch of individual components, but components that really bring together, that create the synergy that creates even more than just individual parts. So we have the capsules, we have the walls, we have CO2 injections. We're trying to simplify farming from being not to take away from land-based, because I still think that's really important, but also to add an extra complement, another layer to add to our security.
Okay. So the next question kind of follows up on that. So you've kind of described what got you into the industry and kind of started you on your path. So I guess my next question is, I'm curious then to hear from you is, so far, what types of challenges have you faced along the way and how did you address them? We'll just start with that kind of up front and start looking at some of those. And so I'll see, Lizette, if you have
Sure. Well, because we're a business and I recognize the other people have different roles within the whole agriculture sector. So we have some very specific challenges for sure. So when we were really getting going, 2020, COVID hit. So we had supply chain issues. We had difficulty getting equipment, manufacturing. I mean, I think it wasn't just specific to our company, but industry wide. So we've had to do some workarounds where we've actually brought on new manufacturers that are looking at our technology, and we're trying to fine tune issues that we saw in our initial productions. The same with our lights. Our lights are manufactured outside of Canada. So we found a Canadian manufacturer, which ensures more security for delivering our products. So number two was proof of concept. Again, any kind of startup is going to have issues of, challenges. And the one thing they say, well, where can I go see an agro capsule? And you know what? We partner with a builder that's international. So we know that the structures already exist and are working, and we can point them in that direction. So, but we are coming to that. We are in the process of setting up an agro capsule in London, Ontario, where our head office is. People want to see what the grow walls look like. So now we have set up a showroom in London, Ontario. So you can actually see the walls, you can see the lights, you can see our growing bins. So, that was our second challenge. The third was marketing. As a new startup, you're always trying to bootstrap everything. And our company has wanted to maintain to be debt free. So that presents a lot of challenges in terms of how do you raise awareness about new technologies. And so it means you have to start networking into different organizations and community groups and so on to say, hey, we're out here. It's not a $25 million investment. You can be participant in this. We want you involved. We are really trying to work on the community aspect of agriculture because that's where it's most important. And the fourth thing was funding for our customers. again, with COVID, everything shut down. The money was redirected in other direct ways. We won't go into that, but you know, we do offer on our website links to provincial and federal programs that are available. I know that CFDCs are out there and so on. But that's been a big challenge for people to engage and take up our offerings to be participants in this new indoor agricultural model. So we now do have a Canadian finance company that will work with our customers to help them get going, but we're always looking for contacts that can help new entrepreneurs and farmers get access to our offerings.
Excellent. I really like kind of pulling on something you said there, and it just kind of dawned on me that we don't think about it, but agriculture and community are kind of two and the same. When you were kind of referencing how many different partners are involved, even in just the work that you're doing from a specific portion. So thank you. Is anything else to add from our other panelists on this question?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I was just thinking about some of the different clients we've seen over the last couple of years in terms of farming, and ironically enough, one of the challenges we heard a lot about was because COVID forced a lot of people to shop local and to recognize the food shortages and the possibility of more food shortages to come, and the panic buying that happened. A lot of people started to source out local food, and some of our local providers, they couldn't ramp up their business quick enough, right? They had this huge boost in sales, increase in demand, and they didn't have the cash flow to, support that. So we did help a lot of businesses ramp up those sales, but only within our limits. And, there were a lot of businesses that we've seen that, really could have taken it to a whole other level with a whole other income stream. With just that additional support. So, I mean, it was brought on by COVID, but I think it's something that was always kind of underlying, and it just brought it to the surface. So it was a pretty good opportunity for those types of businesses to kind of capitalize on what COVID brought about and the way it made people start to think about it.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would say the same. In that, I mean, it certainly, all those issues were underlying. They were always there, but they were never brought to the forefront really until COVID really exacerbated the whole problem. And we definitely saw that within ourselves too. We actually had to pivot quite a bit in that our restaurant on site ended up shutting down, of course, and the culinary programs which we feed into shut down. So we were kind of forced into this dilemma at the very beginning of our spring planting. Was, okay, what do we do with all this land? Do we plant it? Do we not plant it? And we ended up moving ahead and thinking, okay, we're just going to make food regardless, and we're just going to face the challenges that come with it, because the land is just going to grow weeds if we don't grow food. And I'm sure we can find a source for the food. And actually, we did pivot quite quickly as far as aggregation into different models, and we ended up channeling a lot of food into feeding the homeless within our community, as well as going to donations to community care. But those partnerships have also lasted, and so it's kind of created the chance to explore new revenue streams that we weren't already looking at. But could we have done more? Could we have even ramped up more? I think now that we're sort of back into our regular cycle of dealing with the culinary programs and the bistro that's on site, we could still be funneling more food. And how would we create more, and how would we ramp up within such a short period of time? That's a challenge. And I think that the public, even though it's been difficult kind of getting them online with what local food production could look like, or whether or not they could be producing their own, education into producing their own. We get tons of questions constantly, especially in the spring, from people who are now like, okay, well, I guess I could grow my own, and how do I do that? And again, I go back to that loss of generational knowledge. I mean, my grandfather taught me how to plant. He had his own little market garden that he grew in, and all of that food went up to my grandmother, who would then process that food and preserve it and do whatever needed to be done. But that hasn't been done for a generation, and it's amazing how simple things like, if I plant something, and what will I grow, and how do I take care of it, and do I need to add fertilizer? Do I need to mulch? Do I then compost? Like, these are simple questions that they just don't have answers to, which seems so strange. And when I began my journey as far as education is concerned, educating people on farm to table in a very urban setting, there was no understanding of food and where it comes from. Planting a seed, like planting a bean, will create a bean plant. Well, that wasn't understood. Or when we planted apple trees in the back, and I think we planted them in April when they first came out, bare root, and they were like, okay, so when do we get apples? Not till October. Like, but that cyclical nature and seasonality of food production to some degree was lost. And it's trying to re-educate people and give them a better understanding what local nutritional food can be. And yeah, that's been a huge challenge. And not only that, and we found out recently that the challenge is also at the upper levels, at the political levels, when we talk about creating another farm somewhere else. And they're like, oh, well, that's going to be a noisy, stinky venture. And we're like, no, it's not. That's not what farming needs to be. And we look at controlled environment and what Lizette's kind of doing in her space. And like, there's so many different ways that we can produce food. It doesn't have to be, 1,000 acres of spreading manure and large tractors. Food production can be of any sort. And again, I think that basic knowledge has taken a bit of a hit. And I can see that Crystal has a question. I just want to address that in how do we translate the knowledge and information of what we do to gain community support. That's been difficult, but I think doing stuff like this and talking more about it, inviting people out to where we are producing food, or inviting people to understand better about what food production looks like, is really the best way to do it. And then there's no way to just kind of throw the information out there and that hope that people will digest it and understand. We have to actively engage with our community. One of the things that we're really hoping to be able to do with this is to have farms in every community, like right in the middle of community, so that people can see it visually and normalize what food production looks like within a community, not 50 kilometers away from a community and then drive that food another 100 kilometers to a food aggregation space so then it can be disseminated and sent back to the community. It just doesn't make sense.
If I could just add to that, I think it's important that we start with the youth. So when we moved to this area about 15 years ago, we put both of our kids in go-karting. Little Briggs, a couple horsepower, but it had huge traction and huge interest, and the kids all loved it. And you could slowly see it die off because nobody had those hands-on skills to work on their go-karts. They didn't stay at home. They didn't work on their lawnmowers with their parents. They didn't learn those hands-on skills anymore like they used to. And so about 7 years ago, we've seen a little bit of a shift in the number of people kind of dying off participating in go-karting, because the service technicians that worked there were also going to different jobs and places like that. So there was nobody to work on their go-karts. And my husband and I, we grew up in like Pembroke, Beachburg area. And I remember thinking and saying and talking with him saying, like, what do you mean they don't know how to work on their go-kart engines? Everybody should know how to work on, you know what I mean? So I kind of started to see that shift back then, and it's no different with farming. I mean, it's labor intensive. Kids aren't interested in taking over their parents' farms. There's no longer that sense of value and pride in taking over your family farm like that there used to be. So I think you have to kind of start with rebuilding that. The biggest thing we've seen here in our catchment area through a BRE project that we did a few years back was lack of skilled labor, lack of skilled trades, and lack of just general labor for farmers. And so what we did was we got a virtual reality set up in a training room, so we could have people in here to train in a virtual setting and engage youth a little bit more that way, because it's more hands-on, it's more interactive, it's just something that will be of interest to them. But it's getting the software developed, right? It's a couple $100,000, but how to tap maple syrup trees, and take that out to the kids in the high schools to come and try doing those types of things, operating heavy equipment, operating a tractor, different things like that. And I think engaging youth is going to be a pretty key part of the succession planning for this type of thing.
Awesome insights, and thank you for the question, Crystal. All of this is great, and it's dovetailing into the next question that I have for the panel, and I want to open it up because I think you've touched on a few different things. We've talked about skills, we've talked about COVID, talked about all these impacts. So let's cast that wide net, and what are the current trends that you're seeing in this sector and in your particular areas of business? And I want to just kind of dive into a little bit more detail on some of those trends. And I think Lizette, if you would like to kind of start us off on that.
Sure. So I think one of the trends, and the media's really given a lot of attention to indoor farming of late, especially vertically farming. A lot of these tend to be like mono farms again, which we really want to, I think, kind of move away from. We need that diversification, but these are like $25 million and up investments. This is not something that every community can afford to jump into, nor do we want to. I echo with Shane and Tina that we need to, this is community. This needs to be community-based, community-driven because of the benefits that come with that. But I do commend the indoor farms, don't get me wrong, because they are moving the operations closer to the customer, and there's a lot of positive benefits to the environment because we're not traveling food for miles and miles and miles, and the product will be more nutritious by virtue of being closer. Again, the downside is that that's a limited opportunity for small farmers due to the capital costs investment. The trend that we would like to support, as I said, is supporting communities, growing local, meeting Indigenous and immigrant needs, which are distinct and unique, because we do have more immigrants in our country than we did before, and they're probably bringing some old farming techniques from their heritage locations to our country. Whether they get implemented depends on where they land. If they're in a city, that certainly becomes limited. But again, because our roots are in supporting remote Indigenous communities, it made sense that with COVID, it's just not to far remote Indigenous communities, it's to every community now. That we need to generate that self-sufficiency and sustainability and sovereignty. And so, we've actually done a pilot with Spark where we had all their team members come in and grow microgreens and work on our vertical grow walls. And these are all run by volunteers. Miraculously, it happened. And they took that food to local kitchens, et cetera. And people were able to start to learn about some new foods they hadn't tasted before and get the benefits of that. So we're hopeful that, pilots like those will continue throughout into each community, because the benefits include local training, local education, and employment. So though we have our traditional farming, we need to look at the modern ways of farming, and this is not as expensive as buying the land and getting all the equipment. So we have to have a blend of both. Both have value in our food delivery systems. That's my opinion.
Awesome, thank you. Good. Any follow-up from the other panelists on trends, on opening that wide net?
Yeah, I'll go ahead if that's okay. I see a shift in people putting a lot more value in the quality of life that they live. And I find in our catchment area that agriculture and tourism have started to go a lot hand in hand, and you see a lot of people coming out to these more rural areas to have those experiences. We have some big ticket names like Dairy Distillery and Hummingbird Chocolate and stuff like that, and seeing them partner and work with other local producers like maple syrup producers. It really creates an atmosphere that people want to, travel out of the city and come more rural to experience that. And like Lanark County has seen one of the biggest population growths in Ontario, I think third highest in Ontario in the last couple of years. And I think a lot of that is attributed to just those different experiences, the higher quality of life, and the value people are placing on that more so now than they used to.
Excellent, thank you. Shane, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to echo on that. I mean, exactly what you're saying. And agritourism is becoming quite quite a moneymaker for farms in that they don't just have to produce in a monocrop sort of way. I mean, when they do create a more market garden type experience, they can invite people in, and there is a greater financial boon for them to do so. And that is something that I know that all of our students are exploring as well. It's not just about the actual production of food, but they also have to learn how to market themselves and how to bring people into that community. And again, I go back to, I think if we were to normalize this more within communities, we would see people living better, enriched lives, not just from a nutritional standpoint of eating local, better food, but also just from a mindset and emotional well-being in that. I mean, it's not just, we talk about active education or active uptake of information, but there is a passive nature to this. I mean, because for myself, I mean, growing up, I didn't necessarily work with my grandfather in the garden, but I was around him. I noticed what happened. I noticed when tomatoes came into season. I noticed what he did. And it was normal for me. It's just as a passive uptake. And the same thing with my grandmother and preserving and baking bread and things like that. I mean, my brother fixing his car. Well, Tina's talking about go-karts and mechanics. I mean, I didn't ever pick up a wrench to help, but I learned a lot just from being around it and having it normalized within my space. And so the less that we move all of this stuff out of sight, and the more that we make it more visual within our communities, I think the better off we'll be as a community as a whole. And yeah, I mean, trends, yeah, I think we're starting to move in that direction. People are understanding the value and they're placing an importance on it, which is great. That's where we need to be.
And we're having conversations like this.
Yes, and having open conversations like this.
Talking to visualization, and we can all see it, we can all hear it and discuss it.
Yeah, I should have done this out in the garden so you can see it, but I don't get Wi-Fi out there well.
We all came inside to our offices to talk about how great it is to be outside. It's good. We'll do something. We'll pick a farm site in the future, and we'll all get together there. So following up on the trends conversation, I want to go into something a bit more specific with regard to kind of when we talk about community. Government can play a role. So what do you think that Canada and Ontario, separating the province and federal, are doing well in terms of the farm to table movement? And where's there room for improvement from our leadership? And Tina, would you like to kind of start us off on this?
Yeah, I think in terms of government support, there's a lot of barriers right now to lending and to different grant programs. And if you want to see innovation in farming, you have to remove those barriers. And because with any type of innovation, you're going to have risk, right? Things won't innovate if you're not expecting or anticipating that level of risk coming with it. You have to try new things. You have to experiment. You have to kind of go outside of the norm. And if we want to see innovation in farming and in the food industry, I think that the lending parameters need to, be a little more reflective of that and accepting of that. So that's definitely one way that I think, the different levels of government can look at assisting.
Anything to add to that from the other panelists?
I think we need to review the definition of agriculture. It needs to be more encompassing, because in the lens of tractors, soil, fields, right, and what kind of funding has been available, it's all focused in that one direction. But technology and agriculture is evolving. So we need to, as Tina said, open up the barriers to lending, because just because it hasn't been done doesn't mean it shouldn't be funded. Right?
Exactly.
And like I saw things like the Food Infrastructure Fund, which is a Canadian federal fund, but it was only limited to municipalities and not-for-profits or co-ops. And the amount was so small that they wouldn't even be able to barely get their toe in. But if you were to compare, okay, traditional farming, I need a tractor. How much is a tractor? How much is the land I need to buy? How much do I have to invest in labor? It all starts to add up. And that becomes even a bigger chunk of change than trying to smaller operations. So I think that government needs to drop some of the red tape so that we can get farming right into the communities, whether it's an agri-capsule, yeah, that's ideal, but you just could be like on the street here, like in a strip mall. We could be putting up vertical growing walls and feeding people right there, microgreens very, very quickly. Why are we waiting? We all know that there's a food shortage coming. The horse has left the barn. It's time for us to lift up some of these regulations so that people can get going now and stop limiting it to just what traditional farming is. It's past. I mean, it still exists. Don't get me wrong. We need that, but we need to move on to the next evolution. We need to make it work for the people in our community, or we're going to have a lot of ill people, unwell, unfed people. That's
very true.
One of my biggest concerns.
Need to start looking at like new technologies, farm management tools, soil sensors, robotics, tractor data, artificial intelligence, things like that. Will they'll all minimize the impact on the environment. They'll increase production. So once the underlying benefits like that are kind of brought to the surface, maybe then, you know what I mean? It's not as new and it's not as risky, and then it can be piloted and developed. But first, you need the funding.
And even some of the, sorry to interrupt, even some of the AI technologies, I mean, it's great to have them, but are they such a big investment that we lose sight of our initial frontline goal, which is to feed people?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, exactly what has already been said as far as we need to remove the red tape from those producers who are trying to enter in with new technologies. We need to take a look at, what the size of a space is before we call it a farm. And we need to, from the government, from the municipal standpoint, from the regional standpoint, all the way up to the provincial standpoint, we need to get everybody to make some agreements as to what farming is. And so it removes those barriers for all those people who can come in, whether they're producing on like a half acre as small plot intensive type gardens in a rural place, and remove the barriers from them being able to produce in the same way that the large producers are, or whether it's somebody taking over and repurposing an interior space for a controlled environment production in like a strip mall or something like that. But there's so many barriers for people to produce food in a smaller scale and in a different setting. We need very much so to get everybody to recognize that it's something that we need to figure out and get them all on the same page so that there's a standardized view. Some municipalities are actually moving ahead already, like whether it be in Hamilton or the province of Quebec is much further ahead as far as defining what urban agriculture is. So it allows for new farmers to access revenue streams or being able to convince financiers better in their positions than we can in a lot of our communities. So I think we just all got to move the political needle forward so that they understand the importance of this just as much. And we're not going to ever replace, like small plot intensive gardening is not going to replace large scale farming. It's not going to, but if we do develop our ability to better nurture these other ventures, then it takes all of the strain off of these larger producers to do what they're doing, and we're better able to support, especially in times of hardship, whether it be climate hardship or even like the pressures that COVID has put onto these large producers. And our ability to import, export, logistically move stuff from one space across the border to a food aggregator and then move it out again, it's created such a hardship that's unnecessary.
Yeah. Although the sector is traditionally, it's a hands-on, it's a human-centered industry, technology adoption can be used as an economic driver in the industry. And I mean, if we offer continued learning and access to support for innovation in agriculture in these rural communities and tech adoption, it might help overcome the labor shortages.
So there's some bigger challenges too when we open up into the regulatory side of things, right? So kind of getting a bit more specific too on this and a little bit around kind of the impact on Canada. Kind of the next question is a bit more based off of the stats. So according to Dietitians of Canada, 1 in 8 Canadian households do not have enough money to buy safe, nutritious food. All three of you kind of touched a little bit on this in a different aspect. But what can Canadians be doing to encourage a positive change around this here at home? And I'll start. I'll have Shane kick off this question for the panelists.
Yeah, I think we have kind of touched on it in a lot of our conversation already, but we know that growing food is not for everybody. And I mean, one of the questions I get constantly, especially around this time of year, is, oh, I want to start a garden. What do I grow? And that seems like the most basic question to answer. I don't know. What are you going to eat? Like, you buy tomatoes, but do you really like tomatoes? For this to really work, it's not just about educating people about how they can grow for themselves, because maybe they can and maybe they can't within the spaces that they have. Condominium balconies do not lend well to food production necessarily on a scale that's going to support a family. But again, I think that one of the things that I've touched on is for municipalities being more inclusive for food production. I think that maybe we even need to look at municipal partners instead of just hiring groundspeople to manicure the ball diamonds, to cut the grass on the soccer fields, or to plant flowers and gardens. But then maybe we should be looking at municipal spaces to also take some ownership into the production of food within their communities and hire farmers to grow food, or to help facilitate the rest of the community to be able to grow food within a space in a more managed manner, as opposed to, and nothing against community gardens in the form of everybody comes in and grows what they want, but maybe we could also have people coming in, allowing them to help with a farm manager who is employed by the municipality to help grow food within that space. And then maybe they take home a product share based on the amount of effort they've put into their volunteering. Like, there's just so many different ways that we could use space that's unused. I mean, I can look at right now and I can see large amounts of unused space. I mean, it doesn't have to be the capability brown landscape architect version of, acres of grass, leading down to a lake. There's just so much unused space that could be used better for food production. My 2 cents. I feel like I'm standing on a soapbox. Am I standing on a soapbox?
We'll see in a few questions. We'll see how high you are up on the okay. And
I think this is a great platform for us to be able to stand on our soapbox, Shane.
That's the point of the conversation.
Yeah.
What about food waste? Food waste is the third largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions globally. In Canada alone, there's $31 billion worth of food wasted annually, and Ontarians generate nearly 3.6 million tons of food waste and organic waste. So I think, there's an opportunity to be had there, especially in terms of affordability, and you know what I mean. How can we have food shortages and have that much waste at the same time?
Yeah, and actually, can I jump in on that one, Tina? Because that's a really good point in food
Sure.
waste. Another thing that we need to be aware of, I mean, I was aware of in, again, passively working with my grandfather, in that people need to be better educated onto what nutritious food looks like, so that there isn't a waste. I mean, we have this grocery store very narrow vision of what a carrot looks like, what a tomato looks like, what is an acceptable size, shape, color of a vegetable. But when you're growing food for yourself, or when you normalize that, you understand that, it tastes exactly the same, whether or not the potato has sort of like 3 little heads or whatever the heck it is. And so much of that gets wasted in the process of what is an unacceptable version of a vegetable to sell. And there are some companies that have done some work in that area, in helping people take, like seconds or type of reduced food prices. But that amount of waste not only contributes to using up resources that didn't need to be used on farms, creates carbon emissions that are unnecessary, and could have been nutritious food for someone in their belly, but ends up just being rotting on the field. It's ridiculous.
It is kind of crazy. If you reduce the reliance on those cheap staples that we're all used to by going through the grocery store, and you promote that more of a local approach, healthy eating approach.
Yeah.
It seems so simple and so straightforward. Like, why wouldn't everybody do it?
We've even considered from the standpoint of if we're going to be growing different colors of vegetables, like, whether it be like a black tomato or a purple carrot, and people honestly don't know what to do with it. What do I do with a purple carrot? I don't know. You do the same thing you do with an orange carrot. But if they're not told that it's the same thing, then they have difficulty with that. And that engagement from our food producers with the consumers is going to be really necessary for them to create those understandings. So that engagement, and I know Lizette's getting here, so I'm just going to mute myself, and I'm going
to. No, I like what you said about Shane about municipal partnerships. I think that if they have infrastructure funds that are applicable to municipalities, I know the challenge has been, even when I talk to people at food banks, they go, "Yeah, that's great, but we don't have time to grow food to help people." And so it becomes, okay, well, who's going to pick up the mantle here? And if so I do think that your concept there of the municipal partnerships, I mean, there's a whole thing that can tie in with the education, with the community colleges, that students are learning land-based farming, indoor farming, and everything in between, and including refeeding of food that's gone to waste. But I mean, to start with that point, Tina, we go back, why is the food spoiling so fast? Because it's coming too far.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no way nobody wants to eat this. So yes, it does turn to methane, but why aren't we taking that waste food product and putting it into a biodigester that can we can burn some gas and use it as a fuel for something to generate energy for our buildings? Like, we need to look at things in a circular fashion that, nothing is left to waste, right? And engaging the players that want to be part of the growing and feeding of people with microcredits and learning and contributing to the community. So that I know we need somebody to spearhead it. I just don't know who that is. Obviously, we need to bring the players together, much like this conversation is go, okay, well, from my angle, I see it like this, and if we kind of problem solve this, who would be the deliverer of that process, and how do we move it along? Can we get municipalities to change their regulations so that all of this can flow instead of hitting a wall every time we try to innovate and create new solutions?
We have a client here. I don't know if many people are familiar with it. It's Dairy Distillery, and he took the waste from the milk permeate from farmers, and he turned it into vodka, and he calls it Vodka. And it's a pretty big success, and you know what I mean. It takes that wasted product. It takes the expense away from the farmers that had to dispose of it because its high sugar levels, I believe, make it toxic to the ground, from what I remember. But it's a great example of reusing a waste product, right?
Yeah, that's a fantastic space. I've been up there a couple of times. They do some great stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, they really do. Yeah.
There's a link to it now in the chat if anyone would like to. Thank you, Kaylee. So actually, yeah, I should point out, please, the chat is looking very lively. Please feel free to ask questions as we have this conversation. I really like the questions and the conversation that's going on. And I'm picking up on something here too. Everyone seems to be kind of veering into supply chain now. There might maybe aspects around supply chain and logistics and how everything is organized these days, particularly with our fulfillment centers popping up in Durham, in many municipalities. How are we organizing that supply chain? It sounds like that's kind of a part of it as well. So I'll encourage the audience to ask as many questions as you can, because the panelists are just they're dying to get your questions and answer them. And I've got a lot to ask, so I can ask them all, but we want to share and give everyone an opportunity here. So while people work on their next set of questions in the comments, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, what are significant changes in the agriculture sector that need to happen? Like, we're having this conversation around some of the challenges, some of the positives and the trends. So over the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think needs to happen? What's a couple of significant changes from your perspectives that could take place that would make an impact? And for that, I'll let Lizette start us.
Well, regulation, for sure. I think that more training and education of future farming techniques is really critical, as well as existing. And we're going to see more indoor agricultural farming. I don't know how we get around that. I think we do need to look at how we can repurpose other space, whether interiorly or rooftops, because those spaces are empty and they deserve a purpose. And if it can, better the community.
Absolutely. Other panelists, follow up?
Succession planning. There has to be an emphasis and a light shed on the need for succession planning. And a lot of sectors, it's very hard to find a succession plan for your business, especially if it's not a family-run business or if you have children that are interested in taking over that business. But I think that it kind of needs to be brought back to the forefront and a strategy around succession planning for farmers.
Shane?
Well, first of all, is that we are definitely trying to train the new farmers to understand that farming is not necessarily soil and ground, but also there's a lot of different techniques. And yeah, controlled environment, especially with the variability of our environment really being thrown into question and our climate, it's really important that we understand what controlled environment looks like and how it can be of great benefit. I mean, even just some of the spaces that we have, CO2 enrichment allows us to grow more food much quicker than we would normally be able to in regular atmospheric CO2 outside. So just like little things like that can help us bump up our ability to grow in a more controlled manner. But I know there's other things that go around that. Adding in and normalizing technology, and what was brought up in the chat as far as using drones and AI, things like that, a greater adoption of that type of technology that keeps us from wasting time within our food production would be great, and allows us to troubleshoot before things become a problem, whether it be from the integrated pest management standpoint or the spoilage or waste of products or senescence of product. Like, there's so many different applications that'll just keep that moving forward. And I mean, technology is only going to expand. We just have to look at it from a lens of how can we use this new technology to affect agriculture? And yeah, absolutely, the legislation and the political will, the financiers, like all of that part of it, that has to be a part of it, because when it all boils down to it, again, we want to create a healthier, better fed, more enriched community. And there are benefits to that too. There are back-end benefits to feeding people healthier food that reduces our health costs as they grow older, and we have to see that benefit as well. But it's also, I mean, nope, totally lost what I was saying there. I was rambling.
If by 2050, I remember reading not too long ago, by 2050 we're going to need to produce 70% more food for sustainability for the planet. That's huge, but just by 2050. So to meet those challenges, you have to get, a collaborative effort by governments, investors, innovation, agricultural, the whole sector, different technologies. It all kind of needs to come together, because that's gonna create a huge shortage if it's not starting to be addressed right now.
Almost like a food security strategy.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that?
I've said all my piece.
You unmuted there. I thought you were about. I didn't mean to cut you off. So we're getting onto it, and don't worry, Shane. When you're on a soapbox to it, that it'll eventually turn into rambling. So
yeah,
but it's good rambling, and
that's my students. They're used to the ramble.
Oh, they'll say that about any professor. I'm sure they appreciate your insights. because this is all part of a really good conversation. And I've got kind of two more main sort of questions for everyone, and I'll keep an eye on the chat as well, just as the audience has more to ask. I want to kind of veer away from a bit of the trends and the regulatories and kind of coming back to your own personal experiences. What are some of the greatest lessons that you've learned along the way in your journey? We've talked about the challenge. What are some of the best lessons, and perhaps a specific story about something? Maybe it's an easy lesson, or maybe it was a hard lesson you've had in building your business or putting in an apple orchard on a campus. There may be a story there. Lizette, do you want to kick us off on this question?
Well, I will speak on behalf of Food Security Structures as a business. I think the number one thing is that to be nimble, right? And when I don't have a specific story, but I have an example. Like, if a little while ago celery went to like $10 for a head, and so people just stopped buying it, right? But we could see that with other crops coming, and I think what we realize in our offerings at Food Security Structures is that we can change a crop within 6 weeks. We can be into full production, so we don't need to wait for the weather or whatever is needed. We can pivot very quickly to provide what's needed within the industry, in the marketplace, and that's part of the one of the important things about our company is that we're always looking for what are the new innovations that can be added to increase our yield or decrease our operating expense, or to provide a better yield out into the community. So those are lessons, because we got caught on our first couple of iterations of equipment that we're going to be on the lookout. We're already into version 3 and 4 with our new lights, and our radar is on for what will help make farmers more successful.
Thank you, Lizette. And panelists, follow up. Hard lesson.
Just more of a personal story, I suppose, just because not in business for myself, but my youngest son had an allergy. I remember to red food dye, and I've been trying to look up the name. I can't remember what it was called, the red food dye. But the things it did to his skin as a little guy was quite frightening. And it wasn't really until then that I ever spent any time looking into the actual ingredients in the food that we were eating, because I had to. And I remember thinking, I can't believe they put this in all kinds of food unnecessarily. It doesn't even need to be there. It's just colored to make it more appealing for children to want to eat it. And the skin on his cheeks, it would lift up off his face and get dried up, almost like eczema or something, when he was just a little fellow. And I remember our daycare provider saying, he's like Jekyll and Hyde. What'd you give him for breakfast this morning? And that's kind of how we figured it out. She's like, tomorrow just give him regular oatmeal, just plain oats and nothing else. And then the next morning give him, your top toaster strudels. Right, and see what happens. And sure enough, it made him act out. It gave him a skin irritation, and it really wasn't until that time that you have to have that experience, or you have to have that desire, that need to look into what's actually in your food, and it's kind of scary.
It is, and if you start to look up some of those complicated words and chemicals, it's best just not to.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
I feel the need to defend my food scientists to some degree, but I do not disagree with you, Tina, at all. One of the things that we do as far as our program in food and farming is concerned is we teach our students the farming aspects, but we also teach them the food chemistry and the processing, value-added products, how to do their own. So, I mean, from that unique standpoint, they become aware of those chemicals too, and what is truly necessary, what is not, and which ones are naturally derived and which ones are completely man-made. And there's absolutely no understanding out in the public. Even our students themselves don't have an understanding coming into it of why it's necessary to learn these sorts of things. And then, the epiphany moment kind of happens in fourth semester where they're like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
But I mean, the public, you're right. We have no idea we don't understand what's in our food. I mean, and I'm going to say that as far as the big learning things that I've had to contend with is that my understanding is not someone else's understanding. That's the first one. And I can pick out that exact moment the very first week I started teaching in the secondary system in a high school, when we planted a bean seed, just to show them, I put like a glass jar on the front of the desk, and I put a little bean seed down in the soil, like right up against the glass, so that they could see the cotyledon and the radical root starting to form before theirs started to grow out of the soil. But I had one student, just like an urban youth, I'll get very excited when those first two little seed leaves hit the top of the soil, and he's like, "Oh my God, what's it going to be?" But I mean, that was that moment of, oh my gosh, you don't realize that you've planted a bean; it will become a bean plant. There was a complete disconnect. And so from that point on, I really had to think about, when I'm talking about things, or when we're talking about education, that we have to understand that there is no understanding, or we can't assume that there's an understanding. So much of our youth, and certainly our urban youth, have just no experience whatsoever. So that was my first thing that I had to come to terms with. Secondly, you have to understand to be humbled by nature, in that the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. And certainly we've seen, I'm waiting for the storm clouds to start rolling in now. I keep kind of looking out to the right here, thinking, where are my students out in the fields? So I can send that quick text, get cleaned up. So understand that plants will humble you, no matter how much you truly understand them. And in growing techniques, and I'll tell my students, you can do everything right, and sometimes something goes wrong. And we can always go back to basics to try to figure out what it was, but you have to learn to kind of roll with some of the punches. And the last thing that's been really important as far as navigating all of this is that my passions are not necessarily someone else's passions. And so when I can see something that needs to be done, and I can stand on my soapbox and talk about it, it doesn't mean that the other person in the room gets it. And so when we are changing the mindsets of people, we have to learn better how to navigate the conversation so that we make it their passion. Find the angle that makes sense for them, whether it be the financial options or the community welfare options or whatever it is. Help them understand why it needs to be important to them as well, or else you're not going to get anywhere with what you're talking about. So always find out how to engage them.
I call that the what's in it for me factor.
Absolutely. And I know that everybody does that to some degree if they've navigated the bureaucratic arenas. That was a hard lesson for me as a farmer, though. Someone who's very passionate about plants, and most people aren't. And so how do I get them to also understand?
That's a fascinating piece to all of this. As much as we all enjoy food, the overall journey and the life cycle of that seed from when it grows to get to our plate, it's murky for most people. We don't see it. We just see that final product with that red dye in it. And it looks good, and that's all that matters. And that's fascinating how we've grown to kind of perceive our food system that way. So I've got one more kind of big sort of question for the panelists, and I'm hoping that our viewers have a few more questions. So you kind of started to veer into this in the last question in terms of greatest lessons, but let's specifically say, do you have any advice for the entrepreneurs who are joining us today, and for the entrepreneurs specifically in the agri-tech and agriculture business area? What should they be considering when they're establishing their company or their product? And I'll have Shane kick us off here on this one.
The one thing I'm going to say is, it kind of alludes back to what I said about my passions and making sure that other people understand them, in that sometimes it's very difficult to get other people on side. And if I had any advice for any young entrepreneur, it's just it's important that your head is harder than the wall that you're banging it against. Just keep banging your head against that wall. Eventually, you will find the soft spot, and you'll find a way to break through. it can be very defeating when you can't find someone who shares that passion. But when you find that person that believes in what you're trying to do, it's magic. So just keep beating your head against that wall.
Thanks, Shane. And follow-up from the other panelists.
I would say the best advice I could give is to find all the variables, know what they are externally, internally, understand them, know what the threats are, know where to get the best opportunity to capitalize on them. And if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Thanks, Tina.
Mhm.
Is that?
So I've been in a lot of businesses in my life, so I've hit my head on the wall a few times. And as I get older, I start to look at things in a different way on how to evaluate what's a good business. And, traditional land-based farming is very physically demanding. There's no doubt about it. And in this era right now, you have to have deep pockets, or you have to look at alternatives, which is either continue land-based farming, or look at what other processes or ways to do that. So obviously my bent is towards indoor farming. And so speaking from that perspective, you have to be able to evaluate growing systems. Is it hard work with this system? Can you start in a small space and can you build up? Do you know what your rate of return will be? Because this is really important, is that you do make a return on your investment, your capital investment, and so on. Is there a calculator that can show you what to look for in terms of electrical, employment costs, water, taxes, labor, insurance, da 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 da. So, I'm speaking specifically to vertical farming. If this is what you're interested in, I'd be happy to provide you with a list of questions that you should ask any provider. Do you offer a structure? What does that mean? Do I have to use that structure? Can I use something else? What would that be? How many hours will I have to work in this field to be successful? Then you can get into things like how many lights per grow port. How much space do I need? There's a myriad of things, and to be able to evaluate that as a business opportunity, there's existing farmers that probably know the language and what they need to be looking for to determine if they should make that leap to the next form of farming. There are people who are just starting out looking for an entrepreneurial opportunity. Can they physically do it? And I can say with what we're offering, yes, I think there's an opportunity there. So I think it's a very rewarding field to know that you're making such a large contribution to your community, and that alone can be so fulfilling, to be living your purpose. Shane, when you talk about your grandparents showing you this was part of their life. And I think that it's good that, perhaps COVID has brought us all back to what's really important and the quality of our lives and what's really important. And is it better for me to be watching the TV show or out there just tinkering with my plants and feeling part of nature? So I really appreciate the opportunity that, to hear everybody's perspective, and that Spark has brought all of us together to kind of have this exchange of information. And, I'm sure it's going to bring up a lot more questions for people. And, I'm here to answer questions for anybody. If they want to send me a message, I'll shoot you a list of those questions. But I think it's a great opportunity, and the trend is towards more farming, whether it's indoor or outdoor. So I wish everybody success in their ventures.
Thank you, Lizette. Tina?
I would just emphasize the importance of collaboration, especially with your peers. We see it so much in this county. It was one of the things I remember thinking, I would have never thought it happened this way. All the brewers, for example. We see all the local breweries in Lanark County work together all of the time. You know what I mean? And they share ideas. They talk to their peers. They look for mentorship. They mentor when they can. And they work collaboratively together, and they kind of raise each other. They don't see each other as competitors, right? They see each other as peers and colleagues and friends. And I think that you can't get that anywhere else, right? You can't read about those actual experiences. You can't share those experiences with others. So I've seen so many businesses in our area, make it over that hump or make it over that hurdle because a similar business helped them. And that's invaluable.
Awesome. Thank you.
I think to some degree we're modeling that right now. And if I haven't said it before, let me just say, Lizette and Tina, really honored to be on the panel with you guys to speak to this sort of stuff. And I think you're fantastic.
Oh, thanks. You too.
It's mutual. Thank you.
It's been a great conversation. I don't see any other questions directly from everyone. I think one of my fun takeaways here is I like that line, Shane. You got to have a harder head than the wall you're beating it against. I really like that. That's a good statement for any budding entrepreneur. Before we close, any final thoughts from panelists? Did you not get a chance to speak to something you would have liked to because it wasn't asked? Any final thoughts before we close out and go to the networking?
None for me. Thanks.
No, I think I've said my piece. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well,
Just thank you for the opportunity, Peter, very
For
much.
sure. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Agreed.
Well, thank all three of you for joining us, and a big thanks to Kaylee from the Spark Center for organizing this entire event. She's quite the conductor and did a lot of work on the back end and is directing this whole show. So huge thanks to Spark Center and Kaylee and all three of you for putting this together. With that being said, this Startup Grind was brought to you by the Spark Center, and as the Eastern Ontario chapter of the Startup Grind, the Spark Center holds monthly events covering a wide variety of topics, and there will not be a Startup Grind for July, but stay tuned to Spark Center's social pages for details and to register for the upcoming August event. Lastly, if you have not done so yet, once again, be sure to visit thesparkmagazine.ca to subscribe for the summer issue that launches tomorrow. It's jam-packed with everything that Ontario's farm-to-table movement has to offer, along with additional features on food and drink, exciting places to visit this summer, which I'm very interested in myself, and delicious recipes that as well. And it's not one to be missed. It was a pleasure hosting today's discussion. Again, I can't thank the panelists enough for having this great conversation. And now it's time for networking. So I'm going to stick around. I hope a few people do as well. And if you wish to join us, you can navigate to this section by clicking the people icon on the left side of your screen. You'll be paired with one person at a time for 3 minutes, and you can use this time to get to know each other, and you'll have the option to extend the session if desired. Once the time is up, press ready and hop in. We'll automatically move you to the next person. Click the connect button if you'd like to exchange contact information with anyone. And thank you all again, and I will see you shortly in the chat.